Welcome back to the deep dive. Ready to dive into something completely different this time.
Always up for a challenge. What's on the docket today?
Women are made into human cows and must be milked 24 hours a day.
Wow, okay. Definitely grabs your attention. What's the context for that?
It's actually a summary of a show called Grotesquerie, and
Yeah.
based on what you've shared, it sounds like we're in for a wild ride.
Grotesquerie. Haven't heard of that one. Give me the rundown.
Well, it sounds like a blend of horror, mystery, and some seriously disturbing imagery.
Okay, so maybe not a show to watch with dinner. What's the central premise?
From what I gather, the show centers around Louise, a sheriff who's investigating a series of disturbing murders.
Right, and she's navigating a world that seems to be unraveling around her. The murders are particularly gruesome, lots of satanic ritual elements, biblical imagery.
So we're not dealing with your typical whodunit. Sounds like the crimes are designed to shock and disturb. But you mentioned societal anxieties earlier. What did you mean by that?
Well, you have to look beyond the surface, right? Take the human milk factory, for example. It's not just some random element thrown in there for shock value. It's very deliberate, highlighting the exploitation of women, reducing them to their biological functions.
I could see that. But it's interesting that the video creator focuses on this phrase, human cows. It almost makes it sound like a commentary on industrial farming practices, which is a whole other layer of social commentary.
Yeah, and it speaks to the show's ability to operate on these multiple levels of meaning. You have this visceral image of women literally being milked, objectification, but also this underlying critique of how we treat living beings in a system that prioritizes profit over well-being.
So it's like the show is holding up this distorted mirror to society, making us question the ethical boundaries we've drawn. And then there's this recurring motif of a mysterious black liquid, always found at the crime scenes. What's the deal with that?
Well, later on, it's revealed to be sulfur dioxide, which connects back to the biblical references, the whole idea of divine punishment, hellfire and brimstone.
Okay, getting some serious end-of-times vibes here. It's interesting how the show blends the supernatural with the psychological. You know, the video mentions Louise having trouble distinguishing between reality and her dreams. Is that a result of the stress of the case, or is there something more going on?
Most likely a combination of both, right? She's dealing with these incredibly disturbing crimes and facing pushback from her male colleagues.
Yeah, that'll take a toll on anyone.
On the other hand, the show itself seems to be deliberately blurring those lines, creating that sense of unease, uncertainty, not just for Louise, but for the audience, too.
It's like it wants us to question our own perceptions.
Yeah.
So we've got Louise trying to make sense of these murders. Who else is involved in this story?
Well, there's Megan, a nun who specializes in demonic activity.
Okay, so we're definitely leaning into the supernatural here.
Yeah, she's convinced that the murders are part of some satanic ritual, becomes deeply involved in the investigation.
Interesting. Does she clash with Louise's more, grounded approach?
Oh, absolutely. They butt heads quite a bit.
That's such a classic dynamic.
Yeah.
Rational detective versus the spiritual believer. Makes you wonder if the show's just playing on those tropes.
Exactly. And Megan's character might be a bit more complex than she first appears.
In what way?
Well, she's always conveniently present at the crime scenes, often arriving before the police, raises some questions about her true motives.
So maybe she's not just a helpful nun offering guidance. Sounds like she might have her own agenda. But what about the killer? Does the video ever reveal who is behind all of this?
The video keeps things pretty vague on that front. Early on, Louise suspects a former prisoner with ties to human trafficking.
Seems like a reasonable lead.
But then he's found dead, which deepens the mystery even further.
Classic. And there are hints that other characters, even Louise's husband, might be somehow connected to the crimes.
Adding layers to the intrigue.
Hold on, her husband. But the video says he's in a vegetative state.
Yeah, his name is Marshall. He was a university professor before slipping into the coma.
Right.
However, the video hints that his condition might not be as straightforward as it seems.
What do you mean?
There are scenes where he appears to be aware of what's going on around him, even in his coma.
Okay, now that's creepy. So we have a potentially unreliable narrator in Louise, a suspicious nun, and a comatose husband who might be more aware than he's letting on. It's like everyone in this show has a secret.
Exactly. And it seems like the show is less about this straightforward catch the bad guy narrative and more about exploring the webs of deception, the hidden motives that connect these characters.
Well, a character-driven exploration of darkness. And speaking of darkness, the video mentions this detail about Louise's daughter, Merritt.
Oh, right.
Louise keeps having these recurring dreams about her.
Yes, those dreams are significant.
What was that all about?
Well, in these dreams, Merritt is portrayed as this helpless girl, Completely dependent on Louise.
Okay, so a classic nightmare scenario.
But here's the thing. In reality, Merritt is a successful university professor, leading a very independent life.
So these dream sequences aren't just random. They seem to be tapping into Louise's subconscious fears, her anxieties.
Right, and it's almost as if the show is using the dreams to explore the darker side of motherhood, those anxieties about control and letting go that I think many parents experience.
It's like peeling back the layers of these seemingly normal relationships to reveal these darker impulses beneath the surface. And speaking of darker impulses, there's also the character of Joshua, the one treating Louise's husband.
Yes, Joshua is the attending physician at the hospital.
Right. The video mentioned something about him appearing in Louise's dreams, though.
Yeah, in her dreams, he transforms into this sinister figure, often associated with the black liquid and the killings.
Wait, so the doctor who's supposed to be helping her husband is somehow connected to the satanic cult in her dreams? That's unsettling, to say the least.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the story. It blurs the lines between reality and her fears, making us question who can be trusted and what's truly real.
Okay, so we've got a troubled protagonist, a series of brutal murders,
Okay.
a milk factory, and dream sequences that are both disturbing and insightful. What else does this show throw at us?
Well, there's a fire pit spewing sulfur, a mysterious figure in black who seems to be stalking Louise, and a growing sense that everyone in her life is somehow connected to the unfolding conspiracy.
Wow, this is starting to feel like a descent into madness.
Yeah.
Does Louise ever figure out what's going on? Does she find the killer?
Well, the video mentions she confronts the fatter in black and kills them, but then she finds herself in this completely different reality. Suddenly she's having dinner with her husband, daughter, and a man named Ed, as if the violence jolted her into another dimension.
Okay, now my head is officially spinning. A sudden shift in reality after a violent confrontation. That's a major plot twist. Does the video offer any explanation for this?
It does mention that Louise wakes up in a hospital bed, suggesting that the previous events were all part of a dream she had while in a coma.
Ah, so a dream within a dream.
But even after waking up, she continues to experience these strange and unsettling events, things that mirror her dreams. Makes us question whether she's truly awake or still trapped in some sort of psychological purgatory.
So even waking up doesn't provide any relief. It's like the nightmare is bleeding into her waking life. It makes you wonder if she'll ever truly escape the horrors she's experienced.
And that's what makes Grotesquerie so compelling, even just based on this video summary. It's not a show that offers easy answers or a clear-cut resolution. It's a show that challenges us to confront the darkness within ourselves and in the world around us, and to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the monsters we fear are closer than we think.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely intrigued. Maybe I'll have to brave myself and actually watch an episode or two. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's delve into the video itself. What can we glean about the creator's motives for making this?
On the surface, it's a straightforward summary and review, but there's more to it. The title, the focus on certain aspects, and the way the creator connects things back to broader social themes, it suggests they're doing more than just providing a synopsis. They're using the video to explore their own interpretations, prompting viewers to think critically about the show's messages.
So the video itself is a form of commentary, inviting us into this deeper dialogue.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because now we're not just talking about the show, but also how viewers are interpreting and reacting to it.
Okay, so we've got a show that's deliberately unsettling, a video creator using it to explore these anxieties, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's time to delve deeper into those social anxieties. We've touched on the exploitation of women, the show's use of religious imagery, but there's so much more to unpack. We need to consider how these elements contribute to the show's overall message. What are they saying about our own society? And the anxieties we face in a world that often feels increasingly chaotic.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
But that's what makes a deep dive like this so rewarding. It's not just about consuming content. It's about engaging with it on a deeper level, using it as a springboard for critical thinking.
Exactly. And in the case of Grotesquerie, it seems like the deeper we dive, the more unsettling and thought-provoking the journey becomes.
Well, then let's not waste any more time. Join us next time as we continue this deep dive into Grotesquerie. We'll unpack those social anxieties and explore the show's commentary on the power dynamics that shape our lives.
Welcome back to the deep dive, picking up right where we left off with Grotesquerie, a show that's as disturbing as it is thought-provoking.
No kidding. We've already uncovered some unsettling themes, particularly when it comes to the exploitation of women. and the way the show uses religious imagery.
And those themes are directly linked to the show's exploration of power dynamics. It's not just about the obvious displays of violence and control. It's about those subtle ways in which power can be used to silence, to manipulate, and to exploit others.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. We talked about the human milk factory as a pretty clear example of exploitation. But how does that connect to the broader theme of power?
Well, think about the mechanics of that scenario. You have these women who are literally being treated as livestock, their bodies used for profit, controlled by a system that denies them any agency.
I see what you mean. It's like the show is taking those anxieties about bodily autonomy and just amplifying them to a horrifying degree. But it's not just about physical control, is it? There's also that psychological element at play.
Absolutely. Take Louise's relationship with her colleagues at the police department, for example. She's a capable and experienced sheriff, but she's constantly facing skepticism and resistance from the men around her.
It's like they're trying to undermine her authority at every turn, keep her in a subordinate position.
A dynamic that plays out in so many real-world scenarios, especially in male-dominated professions. It's not always overt harassment. Sometimes it's these subtle attempts to discredit, to dismiss, or to just talk over women, making them feel like their voices don't matter.
And Grotesquerie seems to be highlighting those nuances, those insidious ways in which women can be marginalized, even when they're in positions of authority.
It makes you wonder if the show is deliberately using the genre of horror to amplify those anxieties, to make us confront those uncomfortable truths about how power operates in our own society.
I think that's a really insightful observation. Horror has always been a genre that reflects our deepest fears and anxieties. And in this case, those anxieties seem to be centered on the ways in which power can be abused.
Particularly when it comes to gender.
Right. And then you have this added layer of religious imagery, which seems to be playing a similar role.
That's a great point. Religion is often seen as this source of authority and power, and Grotesquerie is clearly playing with that dynamic. We have the character of Megan the nun, who seems to genuinely believe that she's fighting against some demonic force.
But there's also this sense that she's using her beliefs to assert control over others, especially over Louise.
She's always at the crime scenes, offering her interpretations, pushing her agenda.
It's almost as if she's trying to position herself as the ultimate authority on these events, even though Louise is the one with the badge.
And it's not just Megan. There's also Father Joshua, the priest, with the mysterious wounds. He's presented as a spiritual guide, but there's something unsettling about him, as if he's hiding something.
Or manipulating events behind the scenes.
Right. It makes you wonder if the show is suggesting that religion itself can be a tool of manipulation and control.
It's not about the beliefs themselves, but how those beliefs can be twisted and used to exert power over others.
That's a very nuanced reading, and it speaks to the show's refusal to offer simplistic answers. It's not about condemning religion outright. It's about exploring the potential for corruption that exists within any system of power, even one that's rooted in faith.
So it's not just about the scary monsters and the gruesome murders, it's about the monsters within ourselves. Those darker impulses and desires for control that can manifest in so many different ways.
Exactly. And Grotesquerie is using the genre of horror to shine a light on those inner darkness, forcing us to confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the society we live in.
Okay, so we've got this exploration of power dynamics playing out on multiple levels, through gender, through religion, and even within personal relationships.
Yeah.
But what about those dream sequences? How do they fit into this larger thematic framework?
The dream sequences are where things get really unsettling and psychologically complex. On the surface, they're disturbing nightmares filled with grotesque imagery, symbolic representations of Louise's fears. But they're also serving a deeper purpose. They're allowing the show to explore those subconscious desires for control and those anxieties about powerlessness that we all experience.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How so?
Well, take the recurring dream where Louise's daughter, Merritt, is portrayed as this helpless child.
Right. In reality, she's a successful adult.
Exactly. But in the dream, she's regressed to a state of complete dependency.
It's almost as if Louise's subconscious is trying to assert control over a situation that she can't control in her waking life.
Right.
It's like a manifestation of those anxieties that so many parents feel.
About their children growing up and becoming independent.
Right. And it's not just about Merritt. You also have the dream sequences where Louise's husband, Marshall, is somehow aware of what's happening around him, even though he's supposed to be in a vegetative state.
Those scenes are particularly unsettling because they suggest that he might be a victim of some kind of manipulation or control.
even though we don't know who or what is responsible.
It's like the show is asking us to consider the possibility that even those who appear to be powerless can be victims of unseen forces, both internal and external.
So the dream sequences aren't just about providing cheap thrills. They're about exploring the psychological dimensions of power, the ways in which our subconscious fears and desires can manifest in these distorted realities. It's like the show is saying that the real monsters aren't always the ones we see.
They're the ones lurking in the shadows of our own minds.
And that's one of the things that makes Grotesquerie so effective as a horror show. It's not just about the gore and the scares, it's about getting under our skin and making us question our own perceptions of reality and the power dynamics that shape our lives.
And that feeling of being trapped is crucial to understanding the show's overall message. It's not just Louise who's trapped in this nightmare. It's all of us, to some degree. We're all caught up in these systems of power.
Whether it's within our families, our workplaces, or even in society as a whole.
So the show isn't offering a solution or a way out. It's simply holding up a mirror to our own anxieties and making us confront the uncomfortable truth that power is this complex and often insidious force that can't be easily understood or overcome.
It's not a passive form of entertainment. It's a form of engagement, forcing us to think critically about the power dynamics that shape our lives.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to consider the video creators' role in all of this. They've clearly chosen to highlight these particular themes in their summary. Why do you think that is?
I think it speaks to the power of Grotesquerie as a cultural artifact. It's a show that's resonating with viewers on this deep level and is prompting them to engage in these important conversations about gender, about power, about the anxieties we face in a world that often feels increasingly chaotic.
It's like the show is giving us a language to talk about those things that we often struggle to articulate.
Those anxieties about control, exploitation,
Yeah.
the abuse of power that we see playing out all around us.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just analyzing a show. We're exploring the ways in which that show is being interpreted and discussed by viewers who are using it as a lens to examine their own lives and the world around them.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the show's exploration of power dynamics, the manipulation of religious imagery, the psychological complexity of the dream sequences, and the video creator's role in framing these themes for their audience. But there's still one crucial aspect we haven't delved into: the characters themselves.
We've focused a lot on Louise and her perspective, but Grotesquerie features this cast of characters who are all entangled in this web of power dynamics and hidden motivations. And it's worth exploring how those characters contribute to the show's overall message.
We've got the enigmatic Megan, the unsettling Father Joshua, the seemingly passive Marshall, and this whole host of other characters who are all operating in this shadowy world.
And it's through those characters, their relationships, their individual journeys, that Grotesquerie really gets under our skin, makes us question everything we thought we knew about good and evil, victim and perpetrator.
It's not a show that offers easy answers. It's a show that forces us to confront the complexities of human nature and the ways in which we're all complicit in the systems of power that shape our world.
Well, that sounds like a perfect jumping-off point for our next discussion. Join us for part 3 of our deep dive, where we'll delve into the individual characters of Grotesquerie and explore how they contribute to the show's unsettling exploration of power manipulation and the darkest corners of the human psyche.
Welcome back to the deep dive. This show, Grotesquerie,
Yeah.
it's really gotten under my skin.
It's definitely not a show you just casually forget. As we've been talking about, though, there's a lot more going on here than just trying to gross people out. Grotesquerie uses horror as this lens to look at some really real anxieties about power, about exploitation, and the darker sides of human nature.
Exactly. And one thing that really stands out is the characters. They aren't just cookie-cutter good guys and bad guys. Everyone seems to be operating in this gray area where they are driven by their own wants and desires.
You hit it right on the head there. In the last couple of parts, we focused on Louise, the sheriff, and how she's dealing with this world that is getting more and more unsettling. But Grotesquerie spends time fleshing out the other characters too, and I think that's really important to understand what the show is trying to tell us.
Okay, so let's look at some of these other characters then. We spent some time talking about Megan, the nun, and how she seems to be using her religious beliefs to try and take some control of the situations, especially when it comes to Louise.
It's fascinating, isn't it? When you first see her, she seems like that classic archetype. The super devout believer who is there to offer guidance in this really dark world. But as we learn more and more about Megan, you start to question those first impressions. Her always being at the crime scenes, her insisting that the murders are satanic. even her subtly trying to take away Louise's authority. It all paints a much more complicated picture of her.
It's like she's trying to control the story. She wants to be the one who explains what these events mean and tells everyone how they should see it. And that ties right back into those themes of power and control we keep coming back to.
You got it. And then there is Father Joshua. He's the priest who is Megan's mentor. He has this mystery about him, those strange wounds on his back, the weird things he says about evil. It's all really creepy.
It's almost like he represents this dark side of religious authority. He makes you think about how even in institutions that should be about comfort and guidance, you can have manipulation and corruption.
And it's that blurring of the lines that makes Grotesquerie so powerful. It doesn't give you easy answers or say, this is good and that is bad. It wants you to confront the fact that people are complicated, that power can be a really attractive but dangerous thing.
Okay, so we have Megan and Father Joshua showing these different sides of religious power. But then what about Louise's husband, Marshall? He's in a coma almost the entire show, so he can't really be an active player in what's happening.
True, but I wouldn't say he isn't important at all. Even unconscious, Marshall is this really key figure in the story. He represents a different type of vulnerability, a different way that people can be used and controlled by others.
You're right. And those scenes where he seems like he's aware, even though he's supposed to be in a vegetative state, are really scary to watch.
It brings up all these questions about being conscious, about what we know about the human mind, and about whether even when we are at our weakest, someone might still be taking advantage of us and controlling us.
It's like his coma is this symbol for how any of us can be made powerless by forces we have no control over.
Exactly. And that takes us right back to that idea of societal anxieties that we've been talking about. Grotesquerie really zeroes in on those fears of being trapped, losing control, being totally at the mercy of things we don't get.
And those anxieties are just made even worse by the way the show ends. It leaves all these open questions and loose threads. The video said Louise dies and then suddenly wakes up in some other reality, but that doesn't really give you any closure or make you feel like the story is over.
That's one of the things that makes Grotesquerie so different. It doesn't care about giving you all the answers or making sure the good guys win and the bad guys lose. It wants to force us to deal with the fact that life is messy and doesn't always make sense. It wants to tell us that even when you think you've escaped a nightmare, you might still be tangled up in it.
So it's not just a horror show. It's about being human, about wondering what is real, and a warning about how power works in our lives, whether we realize it or not.
You said it. I think that's why Grotesquerie is so powerful. It sticks with you. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world and how power works all around us.
It's definitely a show that's got people talking and arguing about it. I think we'll be talking about this show and picking it apart for years to come.
I totally agree. I think the person who shared this video with you had a great eye for spotting how complex this show is and really starting this deeper discussion.
I think so too. It makes you realize that sometimes the stories that are the most disturbing and messed up can actually teach us the most about ourselves and the world.
Absolutely. We should never forget how powerful telling stories can be, especially when it comes to facing our biggest fears and anxieties head on.
So, to everyone listening, keep thinking about this. And don't be scared to dig into the darker parts of what it means to be human. You never know what you might find. Until next time, keep learning, stay informed, and be safe out there.